the Middle podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and just this past weekend was kind of nice. So it was kind of a mixed bag for some reason. So I've mentioned on the podcast before, my teenage daughter is a challenge. I love her dearly. She's going through a lot of stuff, and I think part of it is also being a senior in high school and all that comes with it. And it's funny, my wife and I were talking about our own kind of experiences, and when you're reaching the end of this kind of milestone, I mean, you have been in school since you're either, depending on your age, anywhere from nursery school, maybe pre-K, kindergarten, but my daughter was definitely a nursery and a pre-K kid, and yeah, she's going through some stuff. It's definitely this kind of transitory time in life, because now you're looking for what's the next step for me, and we're talking about colleges. And so just so you know, I don't know if I've shared this on the show before. I believe I have. You know, I have a master's degree, but I went back to school for my undergraduate at 27 years old. We have always told our kids that there is no expectation of college. It is not expected in our home. We encourage them, if they want to explore a trade, then do so. If you'd like to do a trade and do business, to work the two of them together, even better. But she's really not sure what she wants to do. And I keep trying to say to her, I'm like, look, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 17, 18. Hell, I still don't know what I want to do. I'd love to do content creation, but that's difficult to do when you're doing all the other stuff. So I'm kind of like telling her as a cautionary tale, look, if you want to do stuff like that, things that are more creative in your endeavors, do it while you're young. If you're interested in businesses and entrepreneurship, do it when you're young. Can you do it at any time? Yes, of course. There is no too late for just about anything until it is too late. But so many of us don't know the hour in which our time is. We don't know. So you try to live life to the fullest at all times. And that's so difficult, particularly when you're young, if you don't know. Excuse me. If you don't know, you know? And she's thinking about her interpersonal relationships and her relationship to us as her family and what the next thing holds. So that's been a challenge. But then on Sunday, it was Parents' Weekend down to my oldest, who's down at college. About an hour away. Not bad. And man, let me tell you, with all the other stuff going on, like the day-and-day stuff with his younger siblings, it was such a joy to just go, my wife and I. The other two were invited. They're like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to sleep in. Because one of the key things is he goes to a Catholic college. We're going to get Mass in. The family weekend Mass is always really nice. It's usually packed. It's in one of the halls as opposed to the chapel. And there's this Mexican joint that, you know, he was saying he didn't want to go there. He wanted to do something different. Where did we end up? The same Mexican joint, authentic, good quality food, and the kind of food that you could eat as much of it and you feel fine. Gosh, I'm still carrying, I think, like 3 pounds of it around with me. But that was so nice. And then we just went back to his dorm and just hung out with him and just chatting about what's going on. Got to meet, you know, some of his friends. He has a group of guys that are in a quad together. Man, that room. Whew, we went into the room. Holy cow. But yeah, that's it for housekeeping of this week. Some of the things that are going on with your intrepid host here. But kids, man, kids. And ailing elderly adults. That's a whole challenge too. My wife's had a lot going on. And honestly, confession time, I'm not that helpful. Like, I'm really not. You know, I have two modes with my kids. It's like, hey, you're doing great, and you're grounded. Very, very binary in my choices as far as that goes. Happy or mad. Actually, I've been thinking about doing this whole comedy bit about just the two general emotions, happy or angry. But yeah, anyway, that's all that's going on here. You know, it's life stuff. So one thing I want to tell you about the podcast itself, I didn't put up a Instagram or Facebook post for the podcast. And part of it is I'm curious to see how my content reaches people and how people are tuned in. So if you're listening to this podcast because of the fact that you saw the Instagram or Facebook post and you're one of my followers, and you're only listening to the podcast because you saw the image popped up, that means you're not subscribed to the podcast. So I'm going to ask you, please subscribe to the podcast. I listen to plenty of podcasts, and if I'm not interested in particular episode or content, I don't listen to it, but it'd be awfully great if you were subscribed, and I just would thank you for it. So I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode, as I always do. So let's hop into the topic. So I mentioned last week that P. Diddy, as he is either affectionately or not so affectionately known, is in the midst of a bit of a scandal, a federally investigated series of scandals, if you will. And it permeates all different levels of entertainment, not just in hip-hop circles, because Diddy was very diverse in his financial endeavors, let's put it that way, but also wanting to be a power broker, meaning that he was dealing with people in music, film, other Main Street endeavors, business endeavors, etc. And his parties have become somewhat legendary. And there's certainly a fallout that's going to happen from all of this. And I think people who have talked about, hey, you know, we had this whole Epstein thing and nothing has really come of it. What do we know on a federal investigation level that there has been an awful lot of bad shit that has happened with those in the Epstein vortex, if you will? I think the same thing is happening here with Diddy, but the question then becomes, will anything come of it? Will indictments from more than just the person who's named? You know, obviously someone like R. Kelly, who is in prison now, reached a certain limit of what he could get away with. Whatever palms were greased, high-powered lawyers and payoffs and buy-offs and buying people's silence, basically. So I guess we'll see. But that got me thinking, what were the scandals of our lifetime? So once again, I got fortunate in that I was able to find one website that posted celebrity scandals of the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And I was reminded about how all this tawdry garbage, and, you know, scandals don't just mean the tawdry or the salacious. It's also some real world stuff, political stuff, crime, violence. Very interesting. So why don't we jump in? So this is all from, of all places, I never thought that this would be on my radar. Red Book magazine, which is all online now. I'm not even sure if, does Red Book still get published? Like, what magazines even still get published? And do any of you still get magazines? But these are all written by someone by the name of Colin Scanlon, and these all are dated back into basically June, July of 2023. So you can go find these, all available on redbookmag.com. So, 1970s, the decade following the conclusion of the Summer of Love, and I think that's very important, and you'll find out why in just a minute, was one rife with scandal, controversy, and the dawning of a new culture war. So number one on the list, Hanoi Jane Fonda visits Vietnam. So as you know, Jane Fonda, daughter of Henry Fonda, is a prominent activist, so movie star. And then in 1972, during the height of the Vietnam conflict, toured North Vietnam. And throughout her time there, Fonda appeared on radio programs criticizing the U.S. war efforts in Vietnam, Now, this is completely within her right to have criticisms of the war effort, without a doubt. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on U.S. engagement in foreign affairs. And if we consider ourselves as the South Park guys say, the world police, this was meant to be, in theory, trying to stop the tide of communism spreading throughout Asia. However, going to North Vietnam into that territory probably did not do her any favors. So during her visit, she was photographed seated on a Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun, leading to the veterans of foreign wars calling for Fonda to be tried in U.S. court as a traitor to the nation, despite the actor's anti-war sentiments being fairly commonplace to the American public. Agreed. Fonda has since apologized for the photograph repeatedly, stating her protests were against the U.S. actions, the government's actions, and not against the U.S. soldiers specifically. Now, one of the things that's come up time and time again is how poorly U.S. veterans returning from Vietnam were treated when you think of it in comparison to the returning soldiers from like World War II, for example. So times are very different, but part of it was the anti-war effort was so widespread, particularly amongst young people. So you kind of have that juxtaposed with the fact that you did have concepts of free love, make love, not war. So it's like, on the one hand, completely a patriotic duty, in my estimation, that if you have a true moral objection to war, and this, by the way, if you want to read a great book, you may have heard of Father Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton has become, in I guess, modern history, one of the great Catholic writers who was filled with, in many ways, some hypocrisy, did some things that maybe were less than should be expected of a man in his position, but that's neither here nor there. But he talked about during his younger years and protesting World War I and being against the war effort. So this is not something that is unique to that time period. You just happen to mix that up with a sexual revolution and tons of drugs. But a lot of great music came out of that era. Now, this one wouldn't have been big news then, but it's a scandal in hindsight. So in 1978, a little comedian by the name of Tim Allen was arrested in Michigan airport for possession of 650 grams of cocaine. Allen was only able to avoid a life sentence through a plea deal in which he provided authorities with the names of other drug dealers in exchange for a reduced sentence. So, Tim Allen snitched. He'd end up being paroled just a few years later after serving just 2 years and 4 months of his sentence in a Minnesota federal prison. Excuse me. I mentioned this one a couple of episodes ago. Patty Hearst joins the Symbionese Liberation Army. So after having been kidnapped, Patty Hearst, who is the granddaughter of publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst, ended up becoming a member. She was just 19 years old when she was kidnapped, by the way, from her California apartment, February 4th, 1974 to be exact. And their intention was to extort the political connection of Hearst's family. So they hoped to maintain the freedom of two of their members, Russ Little and Joe Romero, who'd been arrested for the 1973 murder of Marcus Foster, an American educator who had become the first black superintendent of a large urban school district after being appointed associate superintendent of schools in Philadelphia in 1969. So, when the family failed to comply with the demands, they instead demanded Hearst's family donate $70 worth of food to every needy Californian, an effort that would cost roughly $200 million. After being held captive for weeks, Hearst announced that she joined the SLA, taking the name Tanya, and began helping the terrorists create explosive devices, kidnap civilians, hijack cars, and ultimately robbing a San Francisco bank. Of course, shortly after being arrested, Hearst denounced the SLA and claimed she had been brainwashed into participating in their criminal activities. However, she was convicted of bank robbery only to have her sentence commuted to 22 months by President Jimmy Carter, and then was later given a full pardon by President Bill Clinton on his last day in office. Stockholm Syndrome, baby. Stockholm Syndrome. Now, a very famous place, and I believe this was talked about in a movie that was about Studio 54, who were raided by the IRS. After receiving a tip from ex-club employee Donald Moon, the IRS obtained a warrant to execute a search of Studio 54, December 1958. 31 agents executed the search, carting out massive boxes of records, file cabinets, and financial books, while bewildered employees looked on. During the raid, one of the club's founders, Ian Schrager, was arrested for cocaine possession with the intent to distribute after federal agents seized a briefcase carrying 5 envelopes, each containing an ounce of cocaine. Agents were ultimately able to seize more than $3 million in cash after searching the club's ceiling, a safe deposit box, and home safes belonging to club employees. Ultimately, the club's founder, Ian Schrager, and Steve Rubel were found guilty of tax evasion and sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Schrager was later given a full pardon by President Barack Obama, but Rubel was never pardoned for his crimes, as he had passed away from complications from AIDS in 1985. But yeah, Studio 54. What was the movie called? It was just called 54 or something like that. I think Mike Myers was in that, right? Let's see. Mike Myers, Studio 54. Yeah, it was called 54. And Mike Myers was Steve Rubel. Yeah, I thought so. Dark little film. Who was the director of that? It was directed by Mark Christopher, starring Ryan Phillippe, Selma Hayek, Nev Campbell, and Mike Meyer. And Mark Christopher, what else is he known for? Not a lot. Not a lot. So anyway, moving on. So next we have, here we are. So they talk about the end of the summer of love, end of the hippie era, and many people place the blame squarely on the shoulders of one Charles Manson, who is convicted of murder and sentenced to death. So Manson, alongside his sycophantic followers, Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwickel, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for his involvement in the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders, following a months-long trial ending in early 1971. Though Manson and his family were originally given the death penalty, the California Supreme Court invalidated the group's sentencing, automatically commuting their sentences to life imprisonment. Manson would spend the rest of his life in prison, passing away from colon cancer at the age of 83, near a half-century into his sentence. The surviving members of the group, Watson and Krenwinkel, both remain behind bars, but both Manson and Atkins passed away while serving their life sentences. Now, what's interesting about Charles Manson is that he was just convicted of first-degree murder and not conspiracy to commit murder, which I've always found fascinating because there's not a single shred of evidence, I think, that placed him at the scene or having raised a single finger in the actual murders, which is fascinating. Purely cult of personality, cult mentality, and that his followers were willing to do all of that on his behalf. It's crazy. Ooh, boy. Sonny and Cher, their divorce became a scandal, in part because of what Cher said in the filing, where she said in 1974 that she was in involuntary servitude and that Sonny Bono had been withholding her portion of the acclaimed musical duo's earnings, igniting a highly litigious battle between the couple for primary custody of their son, formerly known as Chastity. Though the pair had only legally been married since Chaz's birth in 1969, they'd initially wed informally in 1964. Following the finalization of their divorce in 1975, Cher embarked on a wildly successful solo career, while Bono entered politics, later becoming the congressman for California's 44th District in 1995, a position he'd held until his death in a skiing accident in 1998. Yeah, I mean, they both went their own separate ways, both became successful in the fields that they chose. Obviously, Cher stayed within entertainment, but involuntary servitude in your divorce papers is crazy. And I don't mean, I guess it's difficult to know, because if they're married, at least I know for myself, we have all joint finances, my wife and I. Some people have a problem with that. We never have. Like, as soon as we became serious and engaged, everything just became ours. So I can't imagine. He was like, was he really withholding payments, or it was just everything came in together? I don't know. But man, what a thing to put on your divorce papers, huh? Next, we have Bruce Lee's shocking death. Now, this says something here that I remembered reading about, but it never stays in my mind because it seems so antithetical to what we think of about Bruce Lee. But after laying down for a nap following a meeting with film producer Raymond Chow, Lee was found unresponsive by the producer on July 20th, 1973, after failing to appear for dinner plans. A doctor was called and unsuccessfully tried to revive Lee for 10 minutes before he was transported to Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Hong Kong, where he was pronounced dead on arrival at the age of 32. Now, Lee's sudden death was officially ruled as death by misadventure, catalyzed by a cerebral edema stemming from a reaction to equagesic, a combination drug used for short-term pain relief in patients with musculoskeletal disorders or tension headaches. So basically, Bruce Lee complained that he had a headache, and he was given, hey, take one of these, by Taiwanese actress Betty Ting Pai while at the actress's home. The medical experts later theorized that Lee's fatal cerebral edema had been caused by heat stroke, and then get this, an overexertion, exacerbated in part by Lee's elective removal of his underarm sweat glands in 1972, an ostensibly aesthetic choice made by the actor for appearance on film. So let me read that again. Elective removal of his underarm sweat glands. I will tell you this, talking about edema. So my mother-in-law, she's been suffering through edema in her legs. And the medicine that they recommend, she's like, oh, I don't really want to take that. I'm going to be peeing constantly. And the doctors are like, yes, precisely. So urea is found in urine and sweat, etc. It's meant to do that. There are actual reasons for sweating. It actually moves out waste. So to think that this guy who's known for being so healthy would have an elective procedure like this that takes away the body's natural mechanism for going ahead and getting rid of things. Heat stroke and overexertion, right? He's not able to go ahead and sweat stuff out. It's just mind-boggling to me. But there we have it, 1973, the death of Bruce Lee. Next we have, I don't even remember this. I mean, when this happened, I was like 4 years old. Maybe some of you are going to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that was front page news. Charlie Chaplin's body was stolen. The remains of the late comic actor were stolen from a cemetery near the Swiss coast of Lake Geneva, March 2nd, 1978, just months after his death in 1977 at the age of 88. Later, Chaplin's widow, English-American actress Una O'Neill, received a ransom demand for more than $500,000 to ensure the safe return of her late husband's body. After receiving threats against her two youngest children, police began monitoring Una's telephone line, alongside public phone kiosks in the region, leading to the arrest of two auto mechanics, Roman Wardas and Gancho Ganev, following a 5-week investigation. The pair led authorities to where they'd reinterred Chaplin's body in a cornfield roughly 1 mile from Chaplin's Swiss manor, and were subsequently convicted on counts of grave robbing and attempted extortion. Wardas and Ganev political refugees from Eastern Europe hoped to extort Chaplin's widow to assuage the financial difficulties they'd encountered after fleeing their respective countries. Wardis, the primary architect of the crime, was sentenced to 4.5 years of hard labor, while Ganna was given an 18-month suspended sentence after being found to have limited involvement in the heist. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I never thought of stealing a body and holding it for ransom, but these guys did. Crazy. It's crazy. That really is. Hey, let's dig up Charlie Chaplin and extort his widow for money. This one I know about, not from at the time I was little, but certainly this story has not just lingered, but it almost is mythological to some extent, or part of Hollywood's folklore, and certainly kind of ties in with kind of everything that we've been talking about with Diddy and these scandals. Roman Polanski is arrested. The then 43-year-old Rosemary's Baby director was arrested in Los Angeles March 10, 1977, and charged with a litany of offenses: unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor, perversion, sodomy, sexual assault by use of drugs, performing a lewd and lascivious act on a child under the age of 14, and furnishing a controlled substance to a minor after drugging and raping 13-year-old Samantha Gailey at the home of whose home? Actor Jack Nicholson. The disgraced French director accepted a plea bargain for the lesser charge of unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor in exchange for the remaining five charges being dropped. But upon learning he was still likely to face imprisonment and deportation after the plea deal, dude skipped town, fled to London and then France hours before his formal sentencing, and has continually evaded justice by remaining predominantly in France and other countries unlikely to extradite him to the United States. Polanski, now 89, remains a free man. Look, why the hell was a 13-year-old girl at Jack Nicholson's house during a party with all these Hollywood shakers and movers? We're talking back in 1977. And the same shit is still going on today. At some point, there has to be a reckoning here in Hollywood at some point. It just seems like it's not going to happen, and it's really unfortunate because this stuff just has to stop. Okay, yeah, just awful. All right, so now let's move on to the 1980s, shall we? So this says the calcification of the 24-hour news channel in the 1980s created the framework for the near omnipresence of what would later be social media and celebrity access we desperately cling to today. Each past scandal a now obvious portent of the pitfalls of mass media we continue to grapple with. All right, number 1. Madonna is denounced by the Vatican. Shortly after brokering a multi-million-dollar endorsement deal with Pepsi, Madonna released the highly controversial music video for Like a Prayer in 1989. The video employed an array of religious imagery, burning crosses, an effigy of an unnamed saint, and a parochial church to deliver what would be interpreted both as a bold commentary on racial and socio-political issues of the time and a heretic mockery of the church in equal measure. Pope John Paul II immediately decried the video, encouraging the public to boycott Madonna, while religious groups called for a boycott not of only Madonna, but of Pepsi, creating a completely unforeseen PR calamity for the beverage giant. Pepsi withdrew from its deal with the pop star shortly thereafter, desperately clamoring to distance itself from the controversy as quickly as possible, while allowing Madonna to retain the $5 million promised to her. Despite the widespread outrage, Madonna remained largely indifferent to the criticism and continues to borrow religious imagery in her performances even today. Yeah. You know, there's one that we'll talk about when we get to the 90s. And, you know, I am Catholic. And I recognize that the church has an obligation. And certainly we know that the church has, how do I put this delicately? shirked its responsibility in major ways in what we know about the sex scandals. And I always, struggle with that. But at the same time, you see something that is using the imagery, I think it's appropriate to say, hey, we condemn this and we find this to be an affront to our faith. I think an organization should come to the defense of its basic tenets and principles. And for those who'd be like, well, but whether they were doing all this other stuff, you're right. You're right. The church does not have the moral high ground that it needs to have. So I always keep this in mind. And I say this to anyone who is of any faith. The church is the people, not the organization, right? I always keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons that I'm Catholic today. It's, no, if you stuck to the actual principles, stuck to actually what it's supposed to be, versus this kind of perversion that happens with time because men are fallible. When I say men, I mean mankind. So I don't begrudge them to, hey, Madonna, naughty. And at the time, they didn't have these very public scandals happening behind the scenes, behind closed doors. So they had a little bit more moral high ground at the time. But again, all of it is through the lens of where we are in time. So looking back at the time, Pope John Paul saying, hey, this is BS, boo, whatever. I totally get it. Yet at the same time, a song like Papa Don't Preach probably had a completely different message that probably would have been somewhat embraced by the church, right? It's interesting. Anyway, next, I've always said I'm not a fan of this guy. And this isn't even the reason why, but it's yet another reason why. Matthew Broderick and Jennifer Grey are involved in a deadly automobile accident. Shortly after appearing in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the couple traveled to Northern Ireland together, renting a BMW 316 for the scenic drive through the Irish countryside from Irvingstown to McGuire's Bridge. Shortly after stopping at a petrol station to wait out a heart deluge of rain, the couple collided head-on with another vehicle, killing 28-year-old Anna Gallagher and her 63-year-old mother, Margaret Doherty. When Broderick had mistakenly driven the BMW into oncoming traffic lane, perhaps through force of habit of being an American, where they drive on the other side of the road. Broderick suffered a broken leg and ribs alongside a collapsed lung, while Grey obtained severe whiplash, later necessitating surgery to avoid paralysis. Broderick was subsequently charged with causing death by dangerous driving, facing up to 5 years behind bars, but was only convicted of careless driving and fined $175. Look, even if it was truly just an accident, no alcohol or drugs involved, 2 people's lives, and $175, it's just awful. It's just awful. I imagine it still haunts him. So, yeah, man. But I don't remember that being huge news here stateside. I really don't recall that being that widespread. So world news is now much smaller than it was even just, 40 years ago. Number 3, Corey Feldman sues his parents. The Stand By Me star was a bona fide teen heartthrob by the late 1980s, having earned roughly $1 million from his acting gigs by the age of 15. When Feldman was legally emancipated from his parents in 1987, they had squandered much of that $1 million, leaving him just $40,000, inciting allegations the couple had grossly mismanaged the young star's earnings. To complete the emancipation process, Feldman needed his parents' signature. But his father held out until the young Feldman agreed to sign over the $40,000 remaining, leaving Feldman without a dollar to his name at just 15 years old. Feldman has spoken candidly about the abuse he suffered from his parents, as well as his struggles with drug and alcohol addiction, stating these issues were largely enabled and exacerbated by his tenure as a child actor in the entertainment industry. They made him sign over the last 40 grand he had to his name. Now let's take a look at his current net worth, shall we? So now he's like 50 years old. was going to say like 49, but I think he's like 52 or something. All these years later, he's worth $1 million. He's a millionaire, but he should have had multiples of that if his original $1 million back in the 1980s had actually been invested properly. Man, it sucks. Imagine your parents just being like, nope, give us the rest and we'll sign your stupid emancipation. Good luck. Crazy. This one is famous, world famous, and he'll never live it down. Everyone's favorite doddering old heavy metal grandpa, Ozzy Osbourne, bites off the head of a bat. That's right. 1982, Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa. A fan threw the dead bat onto the stage, resulting in Ozzy believing the bat to be a rubber toy, picking up the carcass, and biting into it. Blood immediately flooding his mouth and spilling down his chin. Osbourne thought the bat was alive when he'd bitten into it in the immediate aftermath, but Mark Neal, the then 17-year-old who'd thrown it on stage, confirmed it had been dead long before making it into Osbourne's grasp. Somehow, this was not the first time Osbourne performatively beheaded a live animal in a macabre public spectacle, having bitten the head off a dove during a 1981 meeting with CBS Records after signing his first solo deal. In capitalist commemoration, Osbourne sold plush toy bats complete with removable head on his website in 2019, the first batch selling out just hours after their release. This one I remember being big news. Ozzy sure does know how to make a spectacle, even when he doesn't mean to. But I mean, that's just, can you imagine biting in to a bat? Have you ever seen a bat up close? Have you? They suck. I hate them. They serve a function, and I don't mind them being around, but stay the fuck out of my house, you creepy little bastards. Oh, this one I remember. Vanessa Williams is stripped of her Miss America title. Williams made history in 1984, becoming the first African-American woman to be awarded the title since the pageant's inception in 1921. Explicit, unauthorized photographs were later published in Penthouse magazine in the weeks leading up to the conclusion of Williams' reign, igniting significant media attention, publicly shaming Williams and pressuring her to resign, leading to Williams later relinquishing her title to Miss New Jersey 1983. That's Suzette Charles, by the way. When Williams served as the head judge for Miss America in 2016, former Miss America CEO Sam Haskell issued a public apology on behalf of the organization. So there was no internet back then, and I will say as a young man, I desperately wanted to see those photos, and it took many years, but I in fact did have a friend who came across this infamous issue of Penthouse magazine. And I will just say that Vanessa Williams was, at the time, negatively impacted initially, but then had a very strong and successful career as an actress, and I believe had a couple of songs as well. So she actually managed to come out of it unscathed. But yeah, that was a huge scandal. Angelica Houston and Jack Nicholson end their relationship after nearly 20 years. Never married, which is why maybe this doesn't really ring a bell to you, but this was also a big deal. So 1 month after ending her relationship with photographer Bob Richardson, Houston met Nicholson, when she attended the actor's 36th birthday party at his palatial Mulholland Drive home in L.A. The pair then began what would be a tumultuous, frenetic relationship that would last off and on from 1973 to 1990. Despite referring to Houston as the love of his life in 1980, Nicholson was persistently unfaithful, eventually conceiving a child with actress Rebecca Broussard in 1989 while he and Houston were still together. The affair ultimately led to the complete dissolution of their romantic relationship, though the two remained fond of one another, even starring opposite each other in Sean Penn's 1995 drama, The Crossing Guard. Ah, Jack. What happened at your house, Roman Polanski? Angelica Houston is amazing, though. She's amazing in everything that she does. She really is. She's fantastic. Oh, boy. So remember, I talked just a few minutes ago about the Catholic Church having scandals and many members of the church falling from grace. So not Catholic, but in Christian evangelical circles, this was huge news. Now, I was a Protestant through all of my youth. So this was big news. The fall of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. Huge news. As hosts of the wildly popular televangelist program, the PTL Club, the Bakkers were emblematic of the wholesome evangelical values they tirelessly espoused, making Jim's 1989 indictment on multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy all the more shocking. In the late 1980s, Jim used funds from the couple's ministry to pay hush money to church secretary Jessica Hahn in an effort to cover up his alleged sexual assault of Hahn. Subsequent investigations into the Bakkers revealed widespread accounting fraud, leading to Jim's conviction and subsequent imprisonment. Tammy divorced Jim in 1992 and later married Roe Messner, the man who allegedly produced the hush money payment to Jessica Hahn, and passed away from colon cancer in 2007. After his release from prison, Jim returned to televangelism, continuing to spew bizarre prophecies of the end of the world. Jim. That was a crazy thing. Jessica Hahn became famous through all of this, ended up having a relationship with Sam Kinison. She also, I think, posed in provocative photos. Just absolutely crazy story. And then Tammy Faye, I think, kind of became a beloved figure in a lot of ways, that she handled things with a certain amount of grace and humor, but fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And oh boy, Sean Penn's multitude of assault charges. The Oscar-winning actor and self-described humanitarian was charged with assault on 4 separate occasions throughout the 1980s and simultaneously dogged by rumors of viciously abusing his ex-wife Madonna through their 4-year marriage. They always try to use movies that people did recently, so they chose the Angry Birds movie star. Really? Sean Penn? Really? Angry Birds movie? He was first charged with assault and battery after he attacked 2 journalists attempting to take photographs of him and Madonna in Nashville in June 1985. Shortly before, he had allegedly assaulted a Hong Kong Standard reporter who'd photographed the couple arriving at their hotel in 1986. Penn was then charged with battery again in June of 1986 after assaulting songwriter David Walensky in a Los Angeles club after the actor accused Walensky of trying to kiss Madonna. Penn later violated his probation and was arrested in April 1987 after punching a film extra on the set of the film Colors, leading to a 60-day jail sentence, of which he served 33 days. Oh, man. Such volatility. But again, there's kind of a recurring theme of people who come across as having some kind of moral high ground for things who are doing just bad shit all the time. Look, I'm sure the paparazzi is a huge pain in the ass, but ultimately, you're not supposed to kick someone's ass because they're taking a photograph, as gross as it is. Marvin Gaye's tragic death. The Motown legend was shot and killed by his father, Marvin Gaye Sr., on April 1st, 1984, after intervening in a quarrel between his parents. Gaye's father, a minister, physically abused his son throughout his childhood, contributing to a lifelong strained relationship between the pair. After a brief physical altercation between Gaye and his father, Gaye Sr. retreated from the room, then returned and shot his son twice using a pistol the singer had bought for him on Christmas to defend himself against intruders. Gaye was pronounced dead on arrival at California Hospital Medical Center, and his father was arrested for his murder shortly thereafter. Gaye Sr. later pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, receiving a 6-year suspended sentence along 5 years of probation. Imagine getting shot by your own father with the gun that you bought for said father so that the father could protect himself from intruders who would be probably trying to break into their home by virtue of the fact that his son is famous and wealthy. It's an awful story all the way around, but an absolute amazing voice and performer was taken from the world April 1st, 1984. If you haven't listened to Marvin Gaye in a minute, just go on to like Apple Music and say Marvin Gaye Essentials, and it just fucking rules. Next we have, oh gosh, we're up against the time here. Guns N' Roses guitarist Izzy Stradlin is arrested for publicly urinating on an airplane. I don't really need to get into that. Just that he peed and then he had the nickname Wizzy for a while. After he got sober, he left music. Pete Rose is banned from Major League Baseball. Former baseball player Pete Rose was permanently banned on August 1989 after it was revealed he'd bet on games while both playing for and managing the Cincinnati Reds. Rose initially admitted to betting on other sports like football and basketball, but maintained he'd never bet on baseball, though he'd later admit to placing numerous bets on MLB games more than a decade after the public denial. Look, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. There, I said it. Is it controversial? I don't know. I don't think so. Just, he belongs in the Hall of Fame. End stop. Period. Done. Wow, the 80s had a lot of stuff. Rob Lowe's leaked sex tape. I talked about that on the Gen X Loves a Comeback, so we don't need to really get into that. Todd Bridges is charged with attempted murder. Again, trying to have like the most relevant or most recent credit to their name. They talk about the Everybody Hates Chris actor, not the Different Strokes actor, seriously. But he was charged with attempted murder after he shot Kenneth Tex Clay 8 times after Clay had allegedly stolen Bridges' BMW. But I'll tell you this, it's not in this article. Tex Clay was a drug dealer, and at the time, Todd Bridges was very much addicted to drugs. He basically robbed and shot his drug dealer while this other stuff that was happening was all very crazy. But he also got his life together and continued to have roles in things like Everybody Hates Chris. Wow, the 80s just keep going. John Belushi's tragic death. The Animal House star deeply struggled with addiction and substance abuse throughout his career, eventually being fired and subsequently rehired by Saturday Night Live on multiple occasions due to his erratic, concerning behavior. After a brief stint of sobriety, Belushi relapsed during the filming of the 1981 black comedy Neighbors and was found dead of a speedball. A speedball is coke and heroin. He overdosed in his Chateau Marmont bungalow by his fitness trainer and bodyguard Bill Wallace. He was found by his bodyguard. The fatal speedball was given to Belushi by drug dealer Kathy Smith, who was later arrested and convicted of involuntary manslaughter for her role in the comedian's untimely death after being extradited from Canada. Can you imagine what his career would have probably been? I could see him have gradually done just what Bill Murray has done, gradually going from these comedic roles, because I think we saw with Belushi that there was the capacity for dramatic work in there. It's just a shame, just an absolute shame. And then number 15, again, this is not really a scandal, but it was if you were a royal. So Princess Diana greatly diminishes early HIV/AIDS ostracization. So basically, this became a big deal because she went to an event right around the time of the AIDS crisis, and she made public appearances holding the hands of AIDS patients and speaking candidly about the realities of living with HIV, dismissing the pervasive fear that HIV/AIDS could be spread through mere physical contact and close proximity, making her one of the first significant mainstream figures to dispel the hysteria surrounding HIV contagion. Despite Queen Elizabeth II disapproving of Diana's work within the AIDS movement and encouraging her to pursue a more cheerful cause, Diana continued her work with the community until her death in 1997. I mean, let's be honest, like at the time, it wasn't really known how it could be contracted and spread. It was pretty bold of her to do that. But I think she just felt, I don't know, sometimes people just have these feelings. And she's like, I don't think that's how it spread. And these people deserve to be seen and heard and treated with dignity and respect. And for that, you just got to say total props to the late Princess of Wales. So now let's see, with just a few minutes left, how much of the 90s scandals we can get through. So, Sinead O'Connor's notorious Saturday Night Live appearance. During a performance of Bob Marley's song War On Saturday Night Live, Irish singer Sinead O'Connor ended her rendition of the ballad by ripping apart a photo of Pope John Paul II before launching the pieces towards the camera and shouting, "Fight the real enemy," to an ominously silent studio audience. O'Connor's statement was intended as a protest against the widespread sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church, an atrocity John Paul II would not acknowledge publicly for another 9 years following O'Connor's performance. Throughout rehearsal for her performance, O'Connor displayed a photo of a Brazilian child who'd been killed by police, withholding her planned photo display from SNL's production team. Here's the thing. She was given a lifetime ban from NBC and had been pelted with eggs as she left 30 Rock. Okay. She knew, and some knew, but it wasn't like this widespread understood phenomenon that, as it says here, it wouldn't be for another 9 years. So this doesn't even say the year. What was that, 93, 94, somewhere around there? But yeah, I mean, early 2000s hit, and it's every diocese. You know, I'm in Massachusetts. The Archdiocese of Boston got hit hard with this because of old Bernie Law and just the moving people around. And come to find out that some of these guys weren't even hiding it, like, at all. And not just with kids, just outright sexual behavior outside of their parishes and going to like parties. And it's just really, really insane. So again, I put my faith in God and not the church as a body. I just happen to like the rites as they are. Just Sinead was right. Sinead was right. That's all I can say. And I wasn't a fan of her then. I was not raised Catholic, but pulling apart the Pope was like a big deal. Oh, you can't do that. But yeah, my respect for her only grew as the years went by. Roseanne's notorious national anthem performance. I don't even really need to get through it. It was meant to be satirical with intentionally abrasive squawks and screeches. I love Roseanne as a comic. I mean, I get it, but man, at the time, given the actual singers have destroyed the national anthem with their quote unquote artistic renditions, I'll take this satirical crazy bullshit over some of that. Go see Fergie. If you haven't seen Fergie, go see Fergie's. Oh, so bad. Oh man, this one, particularly in the Northeast. Amy Fisher, the Long Island Lolita. So basically, she came to national attention in 1992, the year I graduated from high school, after she shot and severely injured the wife of 35-year-old auto body shop owner Joey Buttafuoco after engaging in an affair with Buttafuoco, beginning when she was only 16 years old. On May 19th, 1992, Fisher went to the home of Joey and Mary Jo to confront Mary Jo in a fit of jealous rage. After a heated argument with Mary Jo, Fisher shot Buttafuoco's wife in the face, severely injuring her. Fisher was arrested and subsequently charged with attempted murder, later pleading guilty to first-degree aggravated assault and receiving a 5 to 15-year prison sentence. Following Fisher's conviction, Buttafuoco was charged with statutory rape and served 4 months in prison. After Fisher was released from prison after serving 7 years, she embarked on a career as a writer, webcam model, and adult entertainment actress. Just, that's not a good outcome. That's not a good outcome. Sucks. So, Joey Buttafuoco, special place in hell for you, brother. Special place in hell. Jerry Seinfeld dates a teenager. What's wrong with that? A lot. Particularly when you go through the story. I don't even know if I want to go through the story. 17-year-old Shoshana Lonstein exchanged phone numbers with then 38-year-old comedian Jerry Seinfeld after Seinfeld approached Lonstein, then a senior in high school, and the pair had a brief encounter in Central Park. The couple subsequently dated from 1993 to 1997, with Lonstein even transferring from George Washington University to UCLA, in part to be closer to Seinfeld. Despite being more than twice Lonstein's age, Seinfeld insisted there was nothing inappropriate about their relationship, defending his actions during an appearance on Howard Stern's show, shortly after he and Lonstein began their relationship. Shortly after Polanski and Seinfeld ended their relationship, the comedian met Tommy Hilfiger, public relations executive Jessica Sklar, and asked her on a date. Unaware that Sklar was just returning from an Italian honeymoon with then-husband Eric Nederlander. Sklar filed for divorce from Nederlander just 2 months later and married Seinfeld. See what I mean? It's like, Jerry Seinfeld, what are you doing? Dating teenagers, breaking up marriages? Oh, this one became a recurring theme. And this was, I just think, the first of many. Julia Roberts calls off her wedding to Kiefer Sutherland. This was big news. After beginning a romantic relationship on the set of the 1990 film Flatliners, Roberts became engaged at 24. He wasn't 24 actor then. Kiefer Sutherland in 1991, shortly after Sutherland's divorce was finalized. And Roberts ended her engagement, yes, another engagement, to her Steel Magnolias co-star, Dylan McDermott. Despite their rapturous infatuation with one another, Roberts called off the couple's nuptials just 3 days before the pair was set to walk down the aisle. On the day of what was to be their wedding, Sutherland moved out of Roberts' Hollywood Hills home as the Pretty Woman actress jetted off to Ireland with Sutherland's friend, Jason Patric. After returning from the Emerald Isle, Patrick and Roberts continued their relationship for a time before calling it quits in 1992. And then this happened again, and then she marries Lyle Lovett. No one was expecting that to be the guy that she marries. I mean, Julia Roberts, you are an interesting character. Lisa Left Eye Lopez is charged with arson. That's right. Everyone thinks Andre Rison. They think Left Eye burned his house down. Lopez lit his shoes on fire, and that caught the whole house on fire. It spread through the mansion, resulting in roughly $2 million in damage. Lopez pled guilty to the charge and was sentenced to 5 years probation in order to complete counseling alongside payment of a $10,000 fine and restitution for damages caused by the blaze. Despite this, Lopez and Rison would continue their acrimonious on-again, off-again relationship, marred by accusations of domestic abuse until 2001. And unfortunately, she passed away just a few years later. Here's a big scandal. Milli Vanilli returns their Grammy Award for Best New Artist. At the 32nd Annual Grammy Awards, French-German R&B duo Milli Vanilli, Rob Pilatus and Fab Morvan, were given the Grammy Award for Best New Artist following the success of their 1989 album Girl, You Know It's True, only to have the accolade unceremoniously revoked less than a year later after the group's German producer Frank Farian disclosed the pair hadn't performed any of the vocals. Before the award was officially rescinded, the Recording Academy head Mark Green, Pilatus and Morvan had already decided to return the award, instead suggesting it be given to Brad Howell, John Davis, and Charles Shaw, the singers actually heard on the album. In the years since the Recording Academy's decision to revoke Milli Vanilli's Grammy, online petitions have surfaced urging the Academy to reinstate Milli Vanilli, citing claims the pair were straw men punished by a hypocritical music industrial complex that rarely, if ever, awards total transparency and authenticity in artists. Probably true. Oh boy, 1997. I don't know. This seemed like it's more recent, and I think that's just age. Mike Tyson bites off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear. I'm going to eat your children. I'm going to kill you. During their 1997 WA Heavyweight Championship, a fight ironically billed as the Sound and the Fury, Tyson bit off a large chunk of opponent Evander Holyfield's right ear during the fight's third round. After medical staff intervened, the fight was briefly paused, but resumed shortly thereafter, only to be halted once again when Tyson then bit Holyfield's other ear. Tyson was disqualified from the match, fined $3 million plus legal fees, and had his boxing license revoked by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. While Tyson claims the bites were in retaliation to headbutts dealt by Holyfield, Holyfield speculated Tyson purposely had gotten himself disqualified in order to avoid a knockout loss. Holyfield and Tyson later reconciled, even partnering in 2022 to produce a line of edible marijuana gummies called Holy Ears, alongside a satirical holiday advertisement for the product. Hey, If two former boxers can't get together and joke about biting each other's ears off, I mean, who can? Marlon Brando's son is convicted of manslaughter. Christian Brando, son of actors Marlon Brando and Anna Kashfi, shot and killed Dag Drolet, a boyfriend of Brando's half-sister Cheyenne, at Marlon's Hollywood Hills home in 1990 following an altercation between the pair. Cheyenne, 8 months pregnant with her and Drolet's child at the time, had alleged Drolet had physically abused her when she and Brando had met for dinner. Brando was arrested shortly after the shooting and later accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter in order to avoid a murder conviction. Brando was sentenced to 10 years in prison for killing Drolet, but was released in 1996 after serving just half of his sentence. Brando later died as a result of complications stemming from pneumonia on January 28, 2008, at the age of 49. Imagine being Marlon Brando's kids. This one made big news, and it also inspired a Halloween costume I had many years later. Paul Reubens is arrested for indecent exposure. Reubens, best known for his portrayal of beloved children's character Pee Wee Herman, was arrested for indecent exposure in 1991 after being spotted masturbating in an adult movie theater in Sarasota, Florida. Reubens was subject to a deluge of public ridicule and largely retreated from the public, spending the months following his arrest at the New Jersey estate of tobacco heiress Doris Duke. The Pee Wee Herman actor later pleaded no contest to the charges and was ordered to complete 75 hours of community service, completed in part through his creation, production, and financing of 2 anti-drug public service announcements. Despite the widespread public condemnation, Reubens was supported by a slew of artists he'd held personal relationships with, like Cyndi Lauper, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and Big Top Pee Wee director Randall Kleiser. I mean, he kind of recovered from it because there was no victim, if you will. You know what I mean? It wasn't that he was doing something to someone else. He was doing something to himself in a location that he felt was probably safe for such a thing. And there you go. And here we are. I'm going to go back to this one. Let's see if there's anything else I want to jump into as we wrap up tonight. So back in the 90s, Michael Jackson is accused of child sex abuse crimes for the first of many times. So this was the first time in 1993 by Evan Chandler on behalf of his 13-year-old son, Jordan, a child Jackson had befriended after renting a vehicle from Jordan's stepfather. The Chandlers alleged that Jackson had engaged in kissing, masturbation, and oral sex with the underage Jordan, an accusation Jackson denied and claimed stemmed from Jordan's father, Evan, being jealous of Jackson's close relationship with his son. Police investigation into other children Jackson had a relationship with found that although they admitted to sharing a bed with Jackson, they all insisted nothing sexual had ever transpired. However, LaToya Jackson, Michael's sister, made numerous public claims that Jackson was a pedophile, offering to reveal proof for $500,000, though she'd later retract these statements and claim she'd been forced to make them by her abusive husband, Jack Gordon. The Chandlers later settled out of court with Jackson, reportedly for $23 million in January 1994. Authorities never formally charged Jackson with any crime and closed their investigation in 1994, citing lack of evidence. Was it possible that Michael Jackson was just extorted for $23 million? Yes. I don't know. No one does. Because so many of the people who could have, particularly after he died, came forward, didn't. I don't know. Let's see. Anna Nicole Smith marries oil tycoon James Howard Marshall II. She was 26. He was 89. Just over a year into their marriage, Marshall passed away at the age of 90, igniting a contentious legal battle between Smith and Marshall's children over the late father's estate, of which Smith claimed she was promised half despite being left out of Marshall's will. Smith's legal battle for her share of Marshall's estate ascended to the Supreme Court, eventually ruling to deny her claim to the estate shortly before her death from an accidental drug overdose at the age of 39. Woody Allen marries Soon-Yi Previn. I don't want to go any further into that story. That is his adopted daughter. He's a pig. Done. Nothing else to say about that. So, as I mentioned, it all comes full circle. So if you've made it this far, back in the 90s, Jennifer Lopez and Sean Diddy Combs are involved in a club shootout. In the early hours of December 28, 1999, Lopez and Combs were involved in an altercation that quickly escalated to a shootout after Diddy allegedly knocked a drink over belonging to club patron Matthew Scar Allen. After Allen and Combs began arguing as Lopez exited the club, shots rang out, one allegedly coming from a firearm wielded by Combs, resulting in 3 patrons being injured. Lopez and Combs quickly fled the scene, but were stopped by authorities shortly after when the couple had run a red light in their Lincoln Navigator, where authorities found a stolen 9mm handgun in the vehicle's trunk. Stolen. Guy's a multimillionaire back then. Both were taken into police custody, but were eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. Jamal Barrows, a Belizean rapper turned politician and Combs' protege at the time, was later convicted of assault in connection to the shooting and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Interesting. Jamal Barrows went to prison, but people allege that Diddy had the gun and shot the gun. Witnesses. I guess what I'm getting at is, this guy has been involved in a lot of things, and some have said that J-Lo is quite aware. Now, all of this is allegation. All of this is rumor and innuendo. But man, everything from putting the hit potentially on Tupac, maybe even having some involvement with Biggie's death, and then all this other stuff coming out, and don't even get me started on the potential of what happened with Justin Bieber. But here we are, back in the 90s, a scandal involving Diddy. I don't know. That is a deep labyrinth, a deep web that we could go down. Maybe we will another time. But there you have it. The scandals of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I'm sure some of these you remember very clearly, and some maybe kind of flew under the radar. But it seems as though the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we can see how the cult of personality, the rise of what was at the time social media being through the lens of photographers, paparazzi, magazines, TV shows like Entertainment Tonight and The Hollywood Reporter. And here we are all these years later with social media allowing almost everyone the same kind of access that movie stars and musicians, celebrities have to become famous. It's all very kind of scary, frankly. But here I am having an opportunity to sit down and record a radio show, basically, in my basement on my computer. I don't know. It's crazy. So, what'd you think? And are there any scandals that I missed? Please let me know. And how do you do that? You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, X, and YouTube at StuckPodX. Head on over to the Facebook page, Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast. Like, comment, share, leave 5-star reviews, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.